the summer of 1997, a group of college graduates ventured into the untamed heart of the Alaskan wilderness, driven by the thrill of adventure and the promise of uncovering a piece of history in an abandoned logging camp from the 1940s. What they expected was a week of camping amidst the towering pines and crumbling relics of a bygone era, a chance to escape the looming responsibilities of adulthood and revel in the untouched beauty of nature. But what they found was something far darker, something that turned their journey into a nightmare of primal fear and unexplainable horror. Strange symbols carved into the trees, a trail that led them deeper into the forest's embrace, and an unseen presence that stalked their every move transformed their adventure into a fight for survival. This is not a tale of mere survival against the elements, but a chilling descent into the unknown, where the forest itself seemed to harbor a malevolent intelligence. As you delve into this haunting account, ask yourself, would you dare to venture into a remote wilderness, knowing something ancient and hungry might be watching from the shadows? Could you face the terror of the unknown with nothing but your wits and the fading hope of rescue? The Alaskan wilderness in 1997 was a realm of raw, untamed beauty, a vast expanse of towering pines, jagged peaks, and hidden valleys that stretched across the 49th state like a living, breathing entity. It was a place where the modern world felt like a distant memory, where the air carried the crisp scent of pine and damp earth, and the silence was broken only by the rustle of leaves or the haunting call of an owl. For a group of recent college graduates, Mark, Julie, Steve, Jake, and Alex, the promise of adventure in this untouched landscape was irresistible. They were young, restless, and eager to escape the looming responsibilities of adulthood. Office jobs, rent payments, the daily slog that awaited them back in the lower 48 states. When Mark proposed a week-long camping trip to an abandoned logging camp deep in the Alaskan interior, it seemed like the perfect way to delay the inevitable, to seize one last taste of freedom before the world closed in. Mark was the instigator, a history major with a passion for Alaska's past. His stubbled face often split into a wide, infectious grin that made it hard to say no. He discovered the camp while studying old surveyor maps for his degree, a forgotten relic from the 1940s when logging companies had tried to harvest the interior's massive trees. The camp was only accessible via an overgrown mining road that cut through 80 miles of mountainous forest, a path so remote that the companies had abandoned their efforts after just a few years. The trees were too large, too isolated to be worth the effort, and the camp was left behind, untouched for over 5 decades. "It'll be epic," Mark insisted, his voice brimming with excitement as he pitched the idea to his friends. "Just us, the mountains, and a camp all to ourselves. We'll be the first people there in over 50 years. Julie, Mark's girlfriend, was more apprehensive, her petite frame tucked against him as they sat beneath a circle of trees during the planning meeting. Her dark hair framed a face that betrayed her uncertainty, but she gave an apologetic smile, knowing Mark's enthusiasm was hard to resist. Steve, stocky and pragmatic, shook his head firmly, his voice gruff as he sat on a picnic bench. "You're crazy, man. Why would we hike all that way just to see an abandoned shed?" Mark's eyes gleamed with conviction. "It's more than a shed. There are bunkhouses, equipment, even an old steam locomotive, according to the records." Steve remained unconvinced, but Jake and Alex exchanged a glance, tempted despite the absurdity of the plan. Alex, the narrator of this tale, felt a wave of restlessness wash over him as he stared up at the Alaskan night sky, the stars brighter than any he'd ever seen. The idea of finding a forgotten locomotive in the wilderness suddenly felt more appealing than the monotony of job hunting. After a week of planning, the group gathered their gear, tents, sleeping bags, food supplies, and mosquito repellent, and loaded into Mark's SUV on a brisk Saturday morning. The shy kiss Mark planted on Julie's cheek as they packed revealed another layer to his motivation. This trip was as much about winning her over as it was about uncovering history. They left the highways behind, the paved roads giving way to a rocky mining path that Mark navigated with the help of his GPS, shifting into four-wheel drive as the forest closed in around them. The towering pines hemmed the path, their branches forming a dense canopy that filtered the sunlight into a patchwork of shadows. "No turning back now," Jake said, his voice a mix of nerves and anticipation, echoing the group's collective sentiment as they bumped and crawled mile after mile into the mountains. Dusk fell as they pressed on, the headlights cutting through the encroaching darkness, the forest growing denser with each passing mile. Julie's soft voice broke the silence, her tone tinged with concern. "Shouldn't we camp soon?" Mark shook his head adamantly, his focus unwavering. They continued until the road opened into a broad clearing, and there, illuminated by the moon and stars, stood the weathered timbers of an enormous barn-like structure, the abandoned logging camp. Mark flashed a victorious smile. "Told you." Steve let out an impressed whistle, and the group sat in awed silence, the reality sinking in. They were the first people to lay eyes on this place in over 50 years. The camp emerged from the late afternoon shadows like a ghost from the past, its decaying wooden structures scattered across a broad clearing. 3 large bunkhouses surrounded the area, their walls weathered by decades of harsh Alaskan winters, the wood splintered and gray. Rusted machinery and coils of cable dotted the ground, remnants of a failed endeavor to tame the wilderness. At the far end loomed a massive barn, its slanted roof crowned with a rustic cupola, and behind it, the metal skeleton of a steam engine sat half engulfed by underbrush, its iron frame a silent testament to the camp's forgotten history. "Told you guys this would be epic," Mark said, his grin wide as he surveyed the scene. "Now let's find a spot to set up camp before it gets dark." They drove to a flat area near the tree line, the late summer air heavy with a clammy dampness that hinted at rain. Mosquitoes swarmed in hungry clouds, attacking any exposed skin as the group hurried to erect their tents. Steve swatted at his neck, his voice sharp with irritation. "These things are vicious. Mark, there better not be mosquitoes like this the whole time we're out here." Mark laughed, snapping together his tent poles. "We're in their territory now. Just keep spraying on that repellent." Once the tents were up, they scoured the area for fallen branches, the skittering of unseen creatures in the underbrush raising the hairs on Alex's neck. A distant owl hooted, its call echoing through the quiet forest, and the place already felt different, more alive, more watchful, than any wilderness Alex had ever experienced. Steve got a small fire crackling in a stone-ringed pit near their tents, and as dusk deepened into night, the group crowded close to the warmth and light of the flames. They cooked a meager dinner of beans and hot dogs, the aroma mixing with the smoky scent of burning wood. Mark raised his tin cup of whiskey in a toast, his voice brimming with enthusiasm. "To adventure!" They clinked their cups together, laughing at his zeal, the liquor lighting a warm glow in their chests against the deepening chill. As the fire snapped and sparked, they swapped stories of past misadventures and dreams for the future, the camaraderie a welcome distraction from the isolation of their surroundings. Mark sidled closer to Julie on the wooden log they shared, and she leaned into him with a smile, their connection a quiet comfort in the rugged wilderness. Jake turned to Mark across the flames, his tone teasing. "How'd you convince Julie to come out to this abandoned camp with you anyway?" Julie laughed, her cheeks flushing as she met Mark's gaze. "Let's just say he can be very persuasive." Mark planted a quick kiss on her temple. "I just asked her to go on a crazy adventure with me. Who could say no to that?" Steve grinned, his voice light with jest. "Well, I think Julie needs to be checked for insanity." The kidding eased the underlying tension they all felt, a tension born of the vast, untamed wilderness that surrounded them. As the fire died down to glowing embers, a bone-deep exhaustion settled over Alex. They'd been driving and hiking for most of the past 2 days, and his sleeping bag called to him from inside the tent. Yawning, he said goodnight to the others and made his way over the springy duff of the forest floor, the nylon tent walls creaking in the night breeze as he wriggled into his sleeping bag. Sometime later, Alex startled awake, momentarily confused about where he was. Muffled laughter echoed from the direction of the fire. The woods bathed in silver moonlight filtered through trembling leaves. He smiled to himself, comforted by the ongoing jokes and banter of his friends, and rolled over, drifting back to sleep. Morning arrived damp and gray, a heavy mist pressing down between the dark tree trunks, muffling any distant sounds. Alex hurried to pull on his boots and jacket, anxious to reach the warmth of the rekindled fire. The others were already up, drinking cups of steaming instant coffee as Steve tended to a small blaze. Julie's teeth chattered as she spoke, her voice soft but curious. "So what's the plan today?" Mark blew into his hands, his eyes gleaming with excitement as he glanced toward the looming structures. "I want to check out some of those old bunkhouses and see if there's any equipment left inside." With some good-natured grumbling, the group gulped down their coffees and followed Mark across the clearing, their boots crunching on gravel and broken glass as they approached the nearest bunkhouse. Yellowed curtains still hung in a few cracked windows, swaying faintly in the breeze, and the wooden walls showed deep cracks from decades of harsh weather. Mark led the way, stepping gingerly onto the sagging porch, the front door creaking open on rusty hinges to stir up a cloud of dust that swirled in the dim light. They coughed and waved their hands until it settled, revealing a large open room filled with debris. "This must have been where the workers lived," Mark said, his voice hushed in the gloomy space. Bunk beds lined the walls, some collapsed into rotting planks, others stripped of mattresses and blankets, leaving bare, stained frames topped with a scattering of brown leaves. Along one wall stood a cast-iron wood stove, its stovepipe chimney disappearing through the ceiling, surrounded by dented metal pots and pans coated in layers of dirt and cobwebs. Alex ran a finger through the grime on a nearby windowsill, leaving a streak in the filth. "No one's cleaned this place in a long time." Julie wandered to a shelf mounted on the wall, where cracked porcelain dishes and cups stood in neat rows, ready for a meal that would never come. She picked up a mug, turning it over in her hands, faded blue flowers circling the rim beneath the dust. "Strange to think people used to wake up here every morning, make coffee, go to work," she said, her voice soft with wonder. "All these years later, just left exactly as it was." Steve scratched at some flaky paint on the wall, peeling it away to reveal what stained a dark brown. "Crazy how this was all just left behind when the companies pulled out." Mark peered into a nearby locker, its door hanging half off its hinges, revealing neat stacks of yellowed work clothes and pairs of thick boots. "Wonder if these would still fit any of us," he said with a grin. Jake had wandered to a desk in the corner, where an ancient typewriter sat, its keys brown with rust. Strewn across the desk were weathered notebooks, their pages warped and stained. He gingerly lifted the cover of one, squinting to read the faded script. "Looks like these were the loggers' daily reports," he said. "This one is dated August 13th, 1949. Says, cut down 25 spruce today, mostly young growth. Mosquitoes fierce near the ridge." He trailed off, carefully turning the crumbling pages. A strange silence settled over the room as they imagined the workers writing by lantern light, swatting mosquitoes while the stove crackled, their mundane daily accounts surviving while they themselves were long gone. Alex noticed a few cracked black and white photos hanging crookedly on the wall. Stepping closer, he saw they showed groups of lumberjacks posing with towering tree trunks and piles of cut logs, all squinting at the camera, some smiling with pipes clamped between their teeth. "Tough-looking bunch," he commented. Mark nodded, his voice low. "They had to work in these conditions every day." Alex stared into their weathered faces, trying to picture them sitting around at the end of a long day, playing cards and smoking, their hopes and fears as unreadable as stone. Julie shivered, hugging herself against the chill. "Does kind of feel like we're trespassing, seeing all this." The group grew quiet, pondering the faded glimpses of human history surrounding them. A half-played chessboard on an overturned barrel, initials carved into a bedpost, stacked yellowed newspapers from decades past. These were echoes of people now buried in the Alaskan soil, their lives preserved in the dust and decay of the bunkhouse. Mark finally broke the strange, melancholy spell, his voice firm. "We should probably get moving. Still more to explore out there." Alex took one last look around the gloomy room before following his friends back into the hazy light. After exploring the bunkhouse, the group headed toward the massive barn at the far end of the camp. As they walked, Alex glanced back at their tents, just visible through the trees, and something caught his eye. The campsite looked different in the daylight, a subtle shift that made his stomach twist. He stopped walking, turning to get a better look. There, among the trees surrounding their tents, were strange markings carved into the trunks. "Hey guys, check this out," he said, pointing toward the markings. His friends stopped and turned, their expressions shifting from curiosity to unease. "What is it?" Jake asked. "There's something carved on those trees near our tents. Can't really make it out from here, but it looks weird." They changed course and hiked over to get a closer look. As they neared, the markings became clearer, intricate symbols and lines crudely carved into several tree trunks, just out of view of their campfire. Steve leaned in to examine one, his voice low. "Whoa! These are creepy looking." The symbol was vaguely Celtic in design, with loops and spirals gouged deep into the bark. Mark ran his hand over another, a circle bisected by a straight line, his expression uneasy. "These almost look like runes or something. Were these here when we arrived yesterday?" Alex shook his head, a chill creeping up his spine. "I don't remember seeing any strange markings. I think I would have noticed something like this near our tents." A heavy silence fell over the group as they exchanged tense glances, the surrounding forest suddenly feeling more ominous. "Maybe it was another camping group passing through," Julie suggested hopefully, but her voice lacked conviction. Mark examined a few more marked trunks, his brow furrowed. "I don't know. These look pretty deliberately carved, not just some random vandalism." The symbols gave Alex an uneasy feeling, as if they were being watched, and he half expected to spot someone peering out between the massive tree trunks. But all was still and silent, only the wind faintly rustling branches overhead. "Let's see if there are any more around here," Mark said, slipping into take charge mode. They moved slowly through the trees, scanning for additional markings. About 50 feet out, Jake whistled sharply. "Found another over here." They converged on the deeply etched symbol, a simple circle with a diagonal line through the center, different from the Celtic-looking ones. "This is really strange," Alex muttered. "Who would come all the way out here just to do this?" Mark shook his head, mystified. "I know I was excited to find this camp, but I can't imagine another group hiking these remote backwoods just to carve up trees." They kept searching, soon finding more carved trunks threading away from their campsite and into the dense forest, following a winding path. Some markings were fresher than others, the sap still oozing from the cuts. Alex felt the hairs on his neck prickle as they passed a buckled birch tree etched with a symbol resembling a slender-limbed spider, its shape disturbing on a primal level, like a warning tapped out in an ancient language. Julie's voice trembled as she spoke, her arms crossed tightly. "Guys, I don't like this. It's like someone was leaving a trail right to our campsite." Steve nodded, his voice grim. "Yeah, this is all really creepy. Any chance this is your idea of a prank, Mark?" Mark held up his hands, his tone defensive. "You really think I'd sneak around carving spooky symbols on trees? This wasn't us." The mystery deepened. They were at least 10 miles from any roads or trails. Who could be lurking in these remote woods? The area took on an unsettled vibe, the air thick with an unspoken threat. Part of Alex wanted to pack up and leave that very minute, but the strange symbols captivated him, hints of something larger that his rational mind resisted. Mark slid his small hatchet from his belt, tapping it thoughtfully against a tree trunk. "I'd like to follow this trail a bit and see where it leads. Maybe we can figure out who's doing this." Steve shuffled his feet, looking ready to bolt. "Yeah, I don't know, man. Maybe we should just leave it alone." Julie's face paled, her voice soft but firm. "I'm with Steve. This feels wrong somehow. Let's just go." Mark looked to Jake and Alex, his eyebrows raised. Alex understood Julie's unease, but the temptation to unravel the mystery tugged at him. Jake met his eye and gave a subtle nod. "I say we see where the trail leads," Alex told Mark, ignoring Julie's worried sigh. "As long as we stick together and stay alert. No splitting up." Mark grinned, glad to have recruits for his investigation. "You got it. We'll track this just a bit and see if we can spot anyone else out here." With Jake and Alex on board, Steve reluctantly agreed to come along, and Julie, though visibly nervous, stayed close to Mark's side as they followed the unnerving trail deeper into the shadowy forest. The carved markings led them in winding switchbacks, sometimes growing faint and hard to spot, other times freshly gouged and oozing sap on the broad trunks of hemlocks and spruces. The deliberate nature of the symbols was undeniable, and the group's tense faces and hunched shoulders betrayed their growing fear. The isolating quiet of the forest, broken only by the occasional ominous creak of a tree limb, was truly unsettling. After nearly half an hour, the trail showed no sign of ending, and they were a good distance from camp, but no one had voiced turning back yet. They hiked for over an hour before reaching the edge of Funku, a small clearing, exhausted and on edge. Deciding to make camp for the night, they gathered firewood, but the discovery of the strange markings weighed heavily on their minds. Alex kept watching the trees for any sign of figures lurking in the shadows, the normal forest sounds of birds and squirrels muted, adding to the oppressive atmosphere. Once their fire was crackling, they sat around it, looking bedraggled and anxious. Julie kept glancing over her shoulder into the darkening woods, her voice trembling. "This place gives me the creeps. Those symbols, the trail. It feels like something out there is watching us." Mark put a comforting arm around her, his tone reassuring but hollow. "We don't know for sure someone is watching us. Could just be some weird local tradition we're not aware of." The explanation sounded weak even as he said it. Steve, whittling a stick nervously with his pocket knife, shook his head. "I'm with Julie. This is seriously freaky. I say we get the hell out of here first thing tomorrow." Alex stared into the leaping flames, torn between unease and fascination. "What do you guys think the symbols mean? Any ideas?" Jake shrugged, his voice speculative. "Maybe it's some kind of ancient language, like a lost native tribe or something living out here." Steve let out a derisive snort. "A lost tribe? Come on, man. This isn't some cheesy movie." Jake shot back, his tone sharp. "You got a better explanation then?" Steve just shook his head grimly and went back to whittling. Alex spoke slowly, his mind racing. "It is pretty remote out here. If some group wanted to disappear, I imagine these woods would be perfect for it." Mark nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I've read about hermits and holdouts still hiding deep in the wilderness, but carving up trees is an odd way to stay hidden." Julie threw a stick into the flames, her voice tight. "Whatever is doing this, I wish it would leave us alone. It feels targeted, like we're being tracked." A heavy silence fell over the group as they stared into the fire, lost in thought. Even with 4 other people around him, Alex had never felt so exposed and unsettled. The surrounding forest was an imposing wall of blackness, barely lit by their struggling fire. As the night wore on, weariness overtook them, and one by one, they retired to sleep, until only Mark and Alex remained by the dying fire. "You should get some rest," Alex told him. "I'll keep first watch tonight." Mark nodded gratefully, squeezing Alex's shoulder. "Thanks, man. Just a few hours. Keep that fire going." Now alone, the dark forest seemed to creep in closer around Alex. Every snapping twig or rustling bush set his heart pounding, and he found himself constantly glancing toward the trees, dreading the moment a pale face might emerge from the blackness. When his eyes started drooping, he piled more wood on the fire, the heat and light a frail barrier against the shadows. But despite his best efforts, sleep overcame him sometime before dawn. Jake shaking his shoulder startled him awake, early daylight filtering through the trees revealing a scene that sent his heart sinking. Carved into several of the trees ringing their new campsite were more of the bizarre symbols. Alex hissed through gritted teeth, scrambling to his feet. The others were already up, examining the markings, their faces etched with fear and frustration. "They followed us," Julie said softly, her exhaustion palpable. Mark ran a hand over his stubbled face, his voice tight. "This can't be a coincidence. Something out there is tracking us, moving in the night." Steve's eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep, his voice urgent. "Then let's not stick around to find out what. We need to hike straight back to the cars today." Alex stared helplessly at the ominous symbols, his skin crawling as he imagined unseen eyes watching him as he dozed by the dying fire. "Steve's right. "We should head back," he said, the decision feeling like admitting defeat but necessary. As they prepared to leave, Mark started following another trail of freshly carved markings away from camp, his expression determined. "You guys hike out if you want, but I need to see where this goes. Something strange is happening here, and I'm going to get to the bottom of it." Julie hurried over to him, her voice pleading. "Mark, please, this is dangerous. We should go back together." But looking into his eyes, Alex could tell his mind was made up. Jake and Steve opted to head out with Julie, but Alex couldn't leave Mark alone to pursue whatever was out there. "I'll go with Mark to watch his back," he told the others. "We'll catch up soon." They reluctantly agreed, packing up as Alex saw fear and relief etched on their tired faces. Mark gave Julie a long embrace, whispering something to reassure her. Then he and Alex took deep breaths and headed off into the dense trees. They hiked in tense silence, following the trail of disturbing symbols deeper into the forest. The symbols led them past massive cedar and spruce trunks dripping with emerald moss, the path meandering until Alex lost all sense of direction. Mark paused to examine a symbol etched deep into the furrowed bark of an ancient spruce. A skeletal hand with long, talon-like fingers, its crude lines radiating a palpable menace. "These seem to be getting more intense," Mark said, his voice low. "Or maybe ritualistic is the word. Definitely not just random vandalism." Alex shuddered, imagining the sharp blade gouging into the tough wood, the coldly determined hand that could carve such images. The markings appeared more frequently now, sometimes in clusters on gnarled pines and cedars, growing more elaborate, disturbing shapes and patterns that seemed to pulse with intent. Alex paused when he noticed scratches ringing a tree at waist height, as if made by claws frantically scouring the bark. His pulse quickened as he imagined some frenzied animal, or worse, scraping them into the wood. Mark followed his gaze, reaching out to touch one of the scratches, his voice raw with fear. "Jesus! Looks like something was trying to claw right through the trunk." The raw fear in Mark's voice snapped Alex out of his dread. Mark was always seeking adventure, rarely shaken, but now his face was ghostly pale beneath the stubble. "Mark, I think we should turn back," Alex said quietly. "Whatever is down here doing these things, I don't think we want to find it." Mark kept staring at the scratched tree, hesitant, as if some creature still clawed on the other side. After a few tense moments, he gave a stiff nod. "Yeah, let's get the hell out of here. I've seen enough." With weak smiles of relief, they turned and started retracing their steps, moving quicker now, trying not to imagine unseen watchers tracking them from the trees. It wasn't long before they came to a spot where the trail simply disappeared. No more carved marks on the trees ahead. They spun around, searching for any trace of the symbols, but there was nothing. "Where did they go?" Mark asked, panic creeping into his voice. They backtracked and searched thoroughly, but the trail was gone, as if they'd crossed some threshold beyond which the carver no longer wanted them to pass. Adrenaline surged through Alex as the realization sunk in. They were lost, completely turned around, with nothing familiar in sight. Towering pines surrounded them on all sides like the endless walls of a maze. "Can you remember the way back?" Alex asked, desperation in his voice. Mark shook his head, his eyes darting around. "No, it all looks the same. We must have gotten off track somewhere." Fear overwhelmed them as they realized their predicament. Pulling out a compass provided slight relief. At least they knew which way was south, the general direction of the camp. But who knew how far away that was or what lay between them and safety? "We'll just keep heading south," Mark said, trying to sound positive. "As long as we don't deviate, we've got to run into something familiar sooner or later." Neither believed it, but they had no better options. Gripping their gear, they trudged through the trackless woods, choosing their bearing as straight south as possible. The trees stood utterly still and silent, giving no hint of the way back. Time dragged by at a crawl, the sun sinking toward the jagged western peaks, casting long shadows between the trees. Every snap of a branch or rustle of leaves made them freeze, but nothing emerged from the creeping darkness. As blackness fell, they knew they had to make camp for the night. Without a trail, they'd only get more lost, stumbling blindly ahead. They gathered fallen branches and piled them high, the fire a beacon against the smothering darkness. Hunkering close to the spitting flames, they chewed jerky in silence, too tired and afraid for conversation. A bone-deep chill settled into Alex's limbs, even as sweat beaded his brow from the fire. But Mark's ragged breathing and darting eyes revealed a deeper fear. Exhaustion overtook fear, and Alex slipped into fitful sleep, jolting awake from nightmares of fleeing down an endless trail of symbols with something monstrous close behind. Mark's haunted expression told Alex his dreams were stalked by the same horrors. Dawn's filtered light brought little comfort. They were still lost, and the woods were as menacing by day as by night. Driven by a primal urge to survive, they forced themselves to keep hiking southward, ignoring any strange markings that crossed their path, focused only on finding a way out. By late afternoon, they were near collapse, the woods more overgrown and foreign than where they'd started. Hope was fading fast, but then the trees opened into a gloomy clearing. Alex's heart leaped at the sight, a change in the endless wooded tapestry, but what they saw drained any last flicker of hope. In the center lay the body of a large elk, its throat slit open in a spreading dark stain. Strange symbols carved into its sides, trails of flies swarming the cuts. Mark looked ready to vomit, and Alex turned away, gagging. This was the work of the same hand that had marked the trees to lure them here. When Alex met Mark's eyes again, any last shreds of denial had burned away. Something evil and intelligent lurked in this forest, playing them like pieces on a board. After the gruesome discovery, Mark and Alex stumbled on in a daze until darkness forced them to make camp again. Neither spoke as they numbly gathered firewood and pitched the tent, moving like sleepwalkers through a nightmare. Exhaustion won out over the gruesome visions looping in Alex's mind, and he collapsed into his sleeping bag. But sleep brought little escape. Flames flickered against the tent walls as he drifted into feverish dreams of being stalked through the shadowy woods. A blood-curdling scream jolted him awake, paralyzing him in his sleeping bag until he heard Mark's panicked breaths beside him. "Jesus, I hope that was just a dream," Mark whispered. "Me too," Alex managed, his mouth dry with terror. They were lost and didn't need reminders of what shared this forest with them. Morning came too soon, the thin light barely penetrating the dense canopy. The surrounding trees seemed to creep closer, trapping them with their massive trunks. The memory of the mutilated elk kept invading Alex's thoughts, stealing his appetite, and Mark's vacant stare into the smoldering campfire mirrored his own torment. They packed up and resumed their aimless trek, each step carrying the grim determination of the hunted. They knew they were being played with, driven like prey for some unseen predator's sport. Midday came and went with no change in the woods, each shadowy thicket looking the same as the last. The compass kept them heading south, but they could have been going in circles for all they knew. Mark slapped angrily at a swarm of mosquitoes, his voice strained. "We've got to find water soon. Can't keep this up with no supplies." Alex barely registered his words, focused on not tripping over roots and stones, his legs leaden, feet blistered and raw. As the light faded, they scanned desperately for a spot to camp, but the trees remained relentlessly uniform. Finally, too dark to see, they slumped against the trunk of a towering cedar and unpacked their remaining ration of trail mix, now nearly gone. Without a fire, the woods were deathly silent, with no sounds of scurrying animals or fluttering wings. Alex felt utterly exposed, huddling against the wide trunk, clutching his hatchet for comfort. Sleep came fitfully, his dreams a pitch-black maze of distant screams and endless corridors. He awoke with a gasp, unsure of the time, the cedar's limbs blotting out the night sky. Mark sat against the opposite side of the trunk, his hatchet across his lap, neither daring to sleep at the same time. "My turn to keep watch," Alex whispered. Mark nodded, his eyes reflecting the barest hint of moonlight. Time crawled by, adrenaline and fear keeping Alex alert until dawn's faint light illuminated the forest. Another joyless breakfast of dried fruit and nuts got them moving again, the endless sea of trees yielding no clues to their location. A pervasive dread convinced Alex they would wander until they wasted away. Mid-morning, Mark grabbed his shoulder, his voice a hiss. "Alex, look!" Alex followed his pointing hand, his breath catching. Carved into a tree just off to their right was a symbol they recognized, part of the trail that had led them into the forest's depths. "It's a way out," Mark yelled, embracing Alex. Cautious hope surged through them as they scrambled to examine the marking, quickly finding more familiar symbols marching ahead between the trunks. They hurried along the trail with renewed vigor, scarcely believing their luck after days of aimless wandering. Late afternoon arrived, the markings urging them up a craggy ridge. As they crested the rocky slope, voices echoed ahead, and Alex's heart leaped. They rushed forward and were nearly tackled by Steve, Julie, and Jake, their cries of relief and joy mixing with Alex and Mark's. The group had been searching for them for days, having lost their trail, and by some miracle, they'd found this path again just hours ago. "We'd nearly given up hope of finding you," Steve said, grinning as he embraced Alex. Julie had both arms wrapped around Mark, her voice soft. "Thank God you're all right." They sank down by the group's small camp, wolfing down the first real food they'd eaten in days, taking turns recounting their separate ordeals. "We never found any trail leading out," Julie said, her voice haunted. "Just more of those disturbing markings." Mark took her hand gently. "It's going to be okay now that we found each other." But doubt lingered in his eyes. Steve tossed a branch into the campfire, his voice firm. "I say we get up at the crack of dawn and hike straight back to the cars. No more weird detours. We're getting out of here." Huddled close to the fire, they focused on community and laughter, the horror of the past days melting away as they swapped familiar stories. Alex awoke to rays of morning sun spearing through the pine branches, the urgency of escape driving them to pack up quickly. Mark met his eyes, his voice low. "Let's move fast today. Stay sharp." Alex nodded, sliding his hatchet into his belt. They set off along the